Okay. It's 5 minutes past the hour, so thank you for joining the webinar From Injection to Insight, the tracer used in Surfactant's Huff and Puff projects. This is for the onshore. Uh, and I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Ernesto Fonseca. I'm a board member of the Instituto Argentino of Petróleo y Gas, the Houston chapter. The mission of organization is to support the main institute in Argentina. We're based by being based in Houston. We have the ability to connect in a more practical way the United States unconventional and shell industry with the Vaca Muerta. So in the effort to do those connections, we do webinars on particular subjects that we think are at the forefront in the speed in the leading part of technology, in order to help foster and spread the word in the technical side. Our organization also gives scholarship to advanced Argentinian students to come to the United States and complete master's degrees. You can go and check our webpage in the IAPG H Houston. I'll put that in there. Our scholarship program is managed through the Fulbright Foundation here in the U.S. And has already graduated quite a good number of professionals that then go back to the Argentina industry. We have two great speakers, Claudio Ramos and Richard Abud. I will pass it on to them to introduce themselves. And we think the webinar will last about 35 minutes. So we probably have 20 minutes left in the hour to ask questions. I will be moderating those questions. You can type them also in the feed, or you can raise your hand and we can go directly to you. And in the absence of questions, I have prepared a few ones that I think can expand on the subject. So again, thank you for joining. And Claudio and Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ernesto. Thanks for the opportunity. Good morning, everybody. Good morning to all those joining us online today. Whether you're in Buenos Aires, in Houston, or elsewhere, we really appreciate your time and the chance to speak to you today about enhance and improve oil recovery techniques. Specifically, today we're going to be speaking of Huff and Puff, the role of surfactants, and the use of tracers in unconventional reservoirs. I am Claudio Ramos. I'm alongside Richard Blue, and we represent Tracerco's reservoir team. So I'll start us off today, and then Richard will have midway point. He will start and he will present a case study that we prepared for you today. But I'll do a brief overview of the technologies and how these recovery strategies are implemented in the tight rock formations. So let me start with the tracer technology evolution. So early tracers technology rely heavily on the radioactive isotopes. And these are effective, but they pose a great risk, safety-wise and environmental risk. And some companies have outright banned the use of radioactive isotopes. Tracerco reservoir division no longer uses them, but other segments of the business still require them, downstream facilities, etc., but not us. Not us since the arrival of the chemical tracers. Now, in the early days, the chemical tracers were only detectable at a parts per million levels, and that limited the sensibility and the resolution. Now, with the advancements of analytical chemistry and modern tracers, now they can be detected in parts per billion, even parts per trillion. And this leap in the capability is due to the improvement in the equipment, the laboratory equipment, in the mass spectrometry and gas chromatography and advancements. And they allows us to precisely monitor the fluid movement, the fracture conductivity, and the sonar contribution in these complex reservoirs. So a little bit more about that point from going from parts per million to parts per trillion. Here I have a graph with the tracer concentration versus time. And historically, the tracer technology detected in parts per million will only see the main peak. So the peak right there that you're seeing in red, that are relative high concentration returns. Now, what does that mean for the reservoir or for the diagnostics itself? Well, it means that we could miss an early arrival or the tail end of the arrival, the tracer arrival. And that gives the critical information about the fluid movement and about the retention. So if I move forward with the parts per billion, now with this new advancement in chemistry and the tracers themselves and the equipment, this improvement changes the picture. If you notice here, we have, you can see my mouse, right? Okay, perfect. We have early detection zones and we have extended detection zone. Now with these are, why are these important? Because they show us an early arrival, an early breakthrough, which indicates a preferential flow pathway or fracture connectivity. While the extended zone reveals the long injected fluids, how long the injected fluid remain in the reservoir, how long is it? So you can calculate means residence time for this. And this is important on the use of surfactant because it's helpful to confirm whether there is reaching the target zone, is having enough time to interact with the rock, with the formation. And ultimately, it helps you see an improvement in the sweep efficiency. In short, what I'm trying to say is that it gives us intelligence to optimize the cycle design, the soaking time, and the additive performance, something that the production alone can provide. Now, the Huff and Puff from steam to surfactant. So the Huff and Puff originally was developed for the heavy oil fields. And this Huff and Puff technique use steam injection to reduce the oil viscosity and enhance its recovery. Now, in unconventional plays, the use of steam is impractical because the low permeability in this rock and the high thermal losses that occur when you inject steam. So there have to be a modern approach to still have this technique available to enhance oil recovery. And that started with the pump injecting CO2, surfactants, nanofluids to achieve several recovery goals, right? Now, these nanofluids can be, they're just a surfactant or a solvent with nanoparticles in it. Nothing special. The surfactants are particularly effective in time formations because they promote epicutaneous inhibition, they alter the weldability of the rock, and they reduce the interfacial tension and help mobilize the trapped oil. Now, talking about surfactants, what they do? So surfactants are a surface acting agent. They reduce the interfacial tension between the oil and the water, reducing the contact angle. It's a measurement often taken in these experiments. Now, they facilitate the mobilization of the trapped oil and improve the displacement efficiency. And they do that by altering the wettability of the reservoir rock, so making it more water wet, which is favorable for oil production. Now, as you can see in my slide, there are several kinds of surfactants. The anionic, they're commonly used in EORs. They're due to their low absorption. The cationics, they are a little less common, but because they may react with the clays, they still have their place. And then there is the non-ionics, often used in combination with surfactant solvents and other fluids. Now, the choice of the surfactant depends on the reservoir mineralogy, on the brine chemistry, the temperature, and their ability to remain stable under the wide range of TDS, total dissolved particles, concentrations, and temperature. And by stable, I mean there is a less tendency to form a high viscous emulsion that can cause us damage. So there is extensive laboratory tests that must be performed prior to their deployment, right? Now, let's go over very simple, straightforward, the Huff and Puff cycle and that tracer impact. When selecting a good candidate for a Huff and Puff project, the typical good well will be a well that is already a good well that is being in production for somewhere between 5 and 10 years. The question sometimes arrives as why to wait that long? Why is it necessary to wait that long before you can put it in Huff and Puff? Now, some operators are the opinion that we shouldn't wait at all. So pumping, they are already pumping surfactant in the primary completion with the hydraulic fracturing treatments. Now, the Huff and Puff itself, one of the 3 phases is the shoving period, the soaking time, and the resulting lost production from that. So the 3 phases are the Huff, which is the injection of whether you're occidental and injecting CO2 into your Huff and Puff, or Chevron and you're injecting surfactant of your own, one of your own surfactants, or many independents are also doing this type of work with a combination of fluids, injectants, natural gas liquids, wide grades. Now, the soaking time is the second part of it. It's the showing period where the interaction between the fluids and the reservoir take place, allows for the imbibition to occur and for the wettability to change. And then there's the puff, which is the resume oil production, and then you start monitoring the response. But the devil is in the details, and the economic always play a major part in the EOR. With the injection of natural gas or liquids or wide-grade crudes, the project, some of the operators want this injection and production to occur in the same month to offset each other, cost and production. There is also the diminishing returns. The first cycle tends to be better than the second one, and which is also better than the third one, and so on. So the cycle timing, the frequency, the volumes pumped, all that are parameters that must be that can be optimized. And the reservoir response and tracer feedback help us optimize those parameters. So this tracer impact, the tracers are essential for the subsurface diagnostics, and they help us monitor the fluid movement, the sweep efficiency, and the chemical performance. A little bit into the tracer analysis provides us is the fluid pathways and fracture connectivity. So they can help us identify those. They can tell us the effectiveness of the surfactant, the placement, and the soak duration, and then the zonal contribution and interwell communication. So a very common assumption in the reservoir simulations of economic evaluation prior to an EOR is that the well is inside a cube, and that there's this cube production, and that you inject into this cube and then you produce from it, from these imaginary boundaries. But that doesn't happen in reality. So the tracers shed a light into this communication, and it helps us determine how significant the longevity and the magnitude of this communication. So in short, the tracer information help us make decisions, informed decisions in the soaking time and the cycle frequency and in the wall spacing. So how big this cube is, or how it needs to be, how big it needs to be. And we achieve all of this through the use of concentration curves, breakthrough times, and the decay of the profile decays of these curves to assess the reservoir behavior and refine these EOR strategies. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Richard, who will delve deeper into evaluate tracer technology and walk you through a compelling case study that we prepared for you today. Richard, take it away.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Claudio. You can go on to the next slide. All right. So it's ton of the projects why trace a Huff and Puff, but I mean, this is the reasons why you should trace a Huff and Puff, and I'll go through a few of these line items. You want to quantify measurements of injection fluid recovery. Well, when you're applying the surfactant, you're applying it with water, right? If you've got a reservoir with in situ water, once you open these wells, you're producing water. How much of that is actual injected water, and how much of that is in situ or reservoir water? So the tracers will help you quantify this, the difference, and how much of your actual injection water recovery you have. A good thing about tracing is you can monitor any number of wells. For this project, we trace 4 wells. So there's 4 injection wells, but there are several offset wells. They want to monitor if that injection fluid is migrating to offset wells. That correlates with soak time. If you're going to close these wells in, inject a certain volume of fluid, at what point is it too much fluid and your surfactant is migrating beyond your recoverable limits of these Huff and Puff wells, right? You could produce it at offset wells, but the idea for this project is to keep the injection fluid and surfactant within recoverable range of the injection wells. We can also trace multiple cycles with unique tracers. So we have a plethora of tracers, water tracers, oil tracers, gas tracers, and all types of tracers. But if you want to trace 5 injection wells, 10, and monitor 20 offset wells, you have that capability with tracers. You can also trace the first and second and third and fourth segment of an injection cycle. The idea of that is if the reason for that is if I'm not recovering that first cycle, that first quarter of my injection volume, maybe I'm applying too much fluid, too much surfactant, right? I want to apply enough to be recoverable. For this project, we trace the first and second half of the injection cycle of each injection well. So if 20,000 barrels of each well was in 20,000 barrels of fluid was applied to each well, the first 10,000 has a unique tracer, and the second 10,000 of injection fluid has a unique tracer. Now, you can measure success of a surfactant by oil recovery. Did you increase your oil recovery? Well, then you've got, yes, we made an improvement. But using tracers will help measure not just water recovery, but did I apply enough surfactant? Did I apply too much of a volume or too little of a volume? Can I enhance my recovery? It's an additional tool to validate, all right, I've got more oil, but can I improve this? Okay, next slide, please. So during a study, the injection cycle can last days, weeks. Well, I'm showing you here the autonomous pump used for this project. We have several versions of these, so this is an earlier version. This pump is unmanned, so it's a lower cost. You don't want man hours, lodging, food and subsistence, everything else. This is also solar powered. It can run 24/7 We have these pumps on carbon capture projects running for years. We have these out on projects such as this one running for weeks. So you've got a lower cost. You also have remote operation. So we don't have to be on site to continually check the pump. We can monitor it remotely. Do you have the laser pointer for me?
Yes. Let me move the mouse to it.
No worries.
Give
And
me one
I
second.
wanted to show you on this bottom left segment where we have our
Oh
dashboard.
no, give me 1 second. I don't have the yet.
Okay,
There you go. Now it is.
awesome. Thank you. So on this lower segment, we can actually monitor how much tracer is in storage on the units. We can monitor the injection cycle of the tracer itself. We're monitoring the injection cycle of the fluid, whether it's water for the surfactant job or gas for a gas huff and puff or CO2 storage. And we can share this with the customer, right? I mean, you've got your own tools out there. Operators have their own tools monitoring things, but we also have another form of measurement, right? So we know when we need to go upload or reload the tracer, and whatnot. This pump, like I say, can trace oil or trace gas and water injection with gas and water tracers, and we can run this pump up to 5,000 psi injection pressure. It's pretty high. So it's a small footprint, low operating cost, and it's continuous. Thank you. Next slide. All right, for this project, now we're going to get into some of the details and have some fun. We have 4 injection wells. I've had to scrub a lot of information, right? So it's going to be well A, well B, well C, and well D. If I can get that laser pointer again. So
Yep.
well A, you have injection cycle. The first cycle is traced, and the second half of that injection cycle is traced. So this well was injected for 6 days. The first volume was 20,000 barrels of fluid with surfactant, and the second half was 21,000 barrels of fluid with surfactant, right? So we know which tracers were applied, how much of each tracer, over what period, first and second half of each injection cycle. Oh, we also had offset wells producers monitored around these injection wells. This was to monitor offset communication. Did this fluid migrate too far? The goal of the customer was to not have this fluid detected at offset wells. Now there is a 10-day soak period. So each well was injected for 6 days and then shut in for 10 and then produced. We did move the pump from each one well to the next. So these wells were staggered during injection. So the whole injection cycle lasted about a month. But as one well was complete, 10 days later, it was open during the injection cycle. The next well could be happening at that same period. And offset wells were being sampled for the full period of injection and after completion of injection to verify that that fluid did not migrate to these producing wells. That's it. Yep. Now here's a well layout. It is not the exact well layout of the wells in this study, but it was a stacked play. And we had, can you go ahead and click through the actions real quick? We had for this image, 2 injection wells, right? And then the B, D, F, and E would be the offset wells sampled during the period. Now, again, demonstrating, just giving you a visual representation of the hope was to keep that surfactant within the recoverable region of each injection well and not migrating between that well and the offset wells where it might not be recoverable. The hope is surfactant does its job, releases oil from the rock, changing the wettability, and that oil that's been released is recoverable. I didn't pick 10 days. That's the operator's decision. And I can't verify if that's good or not. 10 days was the soak period for every injection well, so that was not varied. I will highlight that of the 4 injection wells, 2 had surfactant and 2 did not. So again, another goal of the study was to verify, okay, is there a difference, a measurable difference between recoverable water using surfactant and recoverable water without surfactant? Okay, next slide, please. All right, so now we go through the injection cycles. You're going to see on the bottom, we have well A, well B, well C, and well D. These are the traced surfactant injection wells. Well E through L are the offset wells being sampled and monitored. And you can see the time periods at which they are sampled for each well. All samples started around January. That's when the injection cycle began for the first well, right roundabout. And they sampled through June or April. After a few samples, they realized we're not going to see this injection water, and they stopped sampling. So you can see here, the communication is extremely low, if any, maybe at well G, which is located close to one of these injection wells. You can actually see it's this one, well D. It's the same color. But it was decided, okay, we didn't have communication. We kept that surfactant and that fluid within hopefully the recoverable region of the injection wells. I do need to highlight that this y-axis is concentration of tracer measured, and the dates here after the tracer is applied and sample starts. So this injection cycle for well A stopped around February 12th, opened the well, and began sampling. Now you can see for the blue and the orange, that is orange is well A's second tracer, second half of injection. Well A1, the blue, is the first half of injection. Now it's last in, first out. If you're pumping 2,000 barrels or 40,000 barrels of fluid, the last fluid you pump in should be hopefully the first fluid you get back. So you can see we've got higher concentration of the second cycle in early samples. That means you're getting more of that second half of the fluid injected back. That's expected. As time progresses, you're going to see that there's a mixing effect somewhere farther away from the well. And now everything tends to equalize in concentration, both first and second half. Now, that took about a month of sampling to see, all right, now we're recovering equal portions of first and second half. I'd be interested to going back, doing it again, shortening or lowering the volumes of surfactant and volumes of fluid injected and seeing if that changes this time period. And at what point do you think we pumped too much fluid and it's getting to the point where it's ineffective, or the effect is not as great as a recovery? In one well, we compare concentrations. Concentration is directly correlated to amount of tracer recovered and the volume of fluid being produced. So I can say in well A, we're getting higher volumes of the second half of injection versus the first half of injection early on or within that first month period. I cannot compare well A's tracer to well B's tracer. These numbers are lower in concentration. You're seeing around 80 ppb at the beginning, and it begins to drop. And for the first cycle, or the second half cycle, excuse me, of tracer, and around 40 ppb and decreasing over time for the first cycle of tracer. Again, each well, it's the same. Second half fluid is being recovered at a greater volume than the first half. But I cannot compare one well to the next because this well B might have a lower concentration of tracer, but it might be producing a higher volume of fluid. So I have to take into consideration the concentration of tracer, and the volume of fluid being produced. Some simple math will tell me how much tracer is in that volume of fluid. That's mass recovery. I know how much I applied. I can calculate how much is being recovered. And you can go from there and saying percent recovered is similar to percent of water recovery. Claudia, can you go to the next slide?
Yeah.
I talked through the slide in the previous slide. Excuse me for that. So I pretty much discussed everything here. You've got second half recovery. Second half of the fluid is being recovered at a greater volume than the first half of fluid, first half of injection fluid, excuse me. Over time, it does tend to equalize. That's the mixing effect in the reservoir. Eventually, the fluid reaches a pressure boundary. Your first half, second half tend to almost like a train just kind of back up and meet each other and mix at a certain distance. I think future studies within this reservoir can identify where that boundary is and how much fluid you need to apply. There is a uniqueness to this well D. You actually have a separation over a longer period of time. That could be due to geology. We know no two wells are the same. No two portions of a reservoir are the same. This could be just due to the rock itself or the well's performance. I want to highlight that the customer did identify wells that were good performers, that were just, there's still known oil production, but it was to the point that they felt they could remediate and enhance it. The idea is don't go into a well that's a poor performer because it might not be, either there's not enough oil in there to recover, or the well has issues itself in completion, right? If you're going to run a surfactant, do it in a region that you know that you're confident, all right, there's good oil here. We've produced good oil. The wells are functioning well. Let's see if we can make it better once it gets to the point where it's financially feasible, correct?
Richard, looking at the time, we got about 3 minutes to be 40 above the hour. How are you looking into wrapping this up and getting into a couple of questions?
2 slides and then the
Okay.
conclusion slide, so I can move it a lot faster.
Okay.
No problem. Next slide, Claudio.
Yep.
All right, so after you have fluid recovery, you've got tracer recovery and concentration. I know the production rates of the wells, right? Or it's provided by the client. If I take the production rates and the concentrations, I can actually calculate how much tracer is being recovered. And you can see here in well A, we have the first cycle tracer recovery is around 10, 12%. Second cycle, which obviously came back first, we've got about, can you go to the next slide? Or is there an action on this?
That one?
I had bars on mine. It's fine. So for the average tracer recovery on this well A is around 14% tracer recovery. The average recovery of tracer for well B is around 10%. So 14 and 10%. You can see higher tracer recoveries for well C and well D. These average around 16%, 17%. I think it was 18 and 19% for both wells. So right off the bat, I know you're getting more traced water recoveries from well C and well D and less from well B and well A. The surfactants are doing their job. You can confirm that both wells B and well A were the surfactant wells, and they were the wells with surfactant, and less of that water was recovered, meaning the surfactant changed the wettability of the rock, left water behind, and oil was recovered. On the bottom, you can see total percentage of tracer recoveries for well A, well B, well C, and well D. These are obviously higher values. And I can even take that percent tracer recovery, directly correlate to the volume of water, because we spread that tracer out across the entire volume injected evenly. So for every percent of tracer recovery, directly correlates to percent of traced water recovery. There was some reservoir water return. That's why concentrations were declining, even though we applied the tracer to consistent concentration. So we validated there was no communication to offset wells. There was actually very little to no communication between the traced wells, the Huff and Puff wells. And then we have a difference in percent recoveries. The measured fluid, as I stated, yep, migration to nearby offset wells was the objective, and recovery of applied water. The performance difference between wells A and B is due to, and C and D is due to the surfactant was applied to wells A and B. You recovered less water, therefore you've hopefully recovered more oil. I do not have the oil production rates, but you can prove that the water was left behind due to the surfactant. It was kept within the desired region. On average, 15% of the injection water was recovered on the surfactant wells, and about 20% of the injected water was recovered at the non-surfactant wells. And I think further study would help improve how much fluid should you apply and how much surfactant should you apply over time that's recoverable. All right, I finished up pretty quick. Sorry about that, Ernesto, and the timing.
No, I think you did great. Um, so you really talked about, I think a major question. You talk a lot about recovery of surfactant and injected fluids as a proxy for production, but can you give an indication how much production increase you saw before and after? Um,
I know that's a question I wish I could answer. So a lot of clients only share data we need, information we need to produce the results that the tracers can provide. I cannot verify because that would be a testament to the surfactant, and I don't know what surfactants were used. I don't know if two different surfactants were used in those wells, and I can't
okay,
verify the oil production change.
okay. So it remains.
Well, they know it.
Yeah,
Yeah, they
unfortunately, it's
know.
not shared. That's the hard part about being the tracer guys. We don't get all that fun stuff.
Now, in order to apply this technology, you do the tracer a few times and then you go without the tracer, or
You can. So we've done pulse applications where you apply the tracer within a few hours, and you can apply a tracer again within a few hours. You can actually change your injection rates, change your surfactants, change your polymers. There's all methods of tracing. You can trace segments of fluid or full volumes of fluid. And that's a great thing about this continuous pumps is I can trace for years on an injection. So it varies depending on the goal of the job, right? The project.
okay. I have a couple questions here on the chat. First one comes from Harish. What are commonly used surfactants and what is their cost?
We
Of the surfactant.
What are the commonly used surfactants and what cost benchmark are they?
I don't, unfortunately, we're the tracer company.
Okay.
We don't sell or purchase surfactants, so we can't provide that information. Maybe somebody else in the group is with the surfactant
The chemical guy.
Yeah, we could jump in on that one.
There is another question from the feed is, are there any limitations for the application of these tracers, like presence of fractures or heterogeneity or faults,
No,
etc.?
no limitations. I think if so, fractures, heterogeneity, anything that affects mobility of fluid is going to affect the mobility of the tracer because the tracer is adherent to the fluid itself, right? So water tracers have ionic bond to water. They will move with the water. If there's a fracture in place and that water takes that fracture, let's say it's a permeable fracture, it will
Okay.
move that water down that permeable fracture and find another location, right?
So how about total dissolved solid salinity? I mean, that's a big one on the unconventionals. Is there a salinity limit or?
No, there are no salinity limits. If you're talking about water tracers, they're fancy salts, and no matter what the salinity of the water is, as long as it's not saturated with salt and it can't take on anymore. And in your injection cycle, you're injecting clean water with our tracer, which is in parts per billion levels of concentration. The salinity is not going to affect it. These chemicals are very unique, and their signature is extremely unique, and there's no interference.
No, because we do a lot of recycling a lot these days, and with pump rates going so high, people are getting away with very high salinity in order to
Yeah.
recycle
Now, the
water.
limitation that the salinity brings about is the use of the surfactant, and is the surfactant stable on those salinity or reservoir water, reservoir fluids. But the tracer itself, no.
Okay. How about acids well, the last two questions I'll ask, Vaca Muerta, it's a bit deep and who knows, we may find deeper places in deeper bases. Temperature is not an issue, I imagine.
Temperature can be an issue when it gets extremely high. If you're talking Fahrenheit, like 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 190 degrees Celsius. At that point, we have unique tracers that can operate in those temperatures, but you start to dwindle down the numbers. Even 170 C, we will drop off some tracers, but we still have like 30 or 40 available. I mean, we have quite a range of tracers in any other temps, lower temps. But yes, it does affect it to a point. It's pretty hot though.
And then, some operators pump a little bit of HCl in the front of the job to open up the perfs in case the guns didn't do a perfect job. Well, it's a bit of an art because you're doing limited entry, so you want limited holes, right? But so the acid HCl at 15% concentration, 10%. Do you need to space it out if you're using the tracers, or you can go just right behind it?
So we if you're yes, if you're applying water after the acid, we would just we start applying tracer directly after the acid with the clean water. Okay.
Yeah.
If it's just an acid clean out and you're isolating stages and you're just pumping acid, we do have unique tracers that will not be affected by the acid. Again, it goes back to limited numbers of tracers. But for a typical frac job, as long as you're pumping some clean fluid behind that acid, it's not an issue.
Have anyone done these type of jobs with diverters, chemical diverters, to try to get the surfactant in other locations, right? Because I mean, you're bumping into this very long lateral full of holes and fractures, right? It's probably going to go somewhere and keep going there, right?
Yeah,
Anybody done the chemical divergence or mechanical divergence?
yes. Yeah, so we apply pre-diverter, post-diverter. If you have different diverter applicate stages, maybe you're pumping three different diverters. We would trace between diverters. The only caveat is we are measuring fluid return for each segment of diverters. We don't know where it went because you don't know where it went either. Those diverters are just finding flowing paths, blocking it off, and hopefully opening up a new path. So we couldn't tell you which segment of the well it returned from, but we can tell you which segment of diverted fluid is returning and how much of it is returning.
Okay.
Kind of like the example that we just did with half and half. They trace the first half and then they trace the second half. That there will be, so we can tell what went in first, what came back first, but not exactly where did it enter or came back into the well.
It's a great way to verify that all that diverter is cleaning out and you're getting all that fluid back, if any of that fluid back.
All right. Carlos Claros asked a question, interesting one. Naturally occurring radioactive matter, norm, right? Existing in water. How will that interfere with your tracers, if at all?
Well, our tracers are chemical tracers, so we're not measuring radioactivity. And we filter our water, but not that will be filtered, but our chemical machines will just do the analysis and this not norm, it won't.
Yeah, it won't affect the results.
It won't affect our results.
Yeah, this is all chemical based, so any radioactivity is not an issue. As long as it's not something we have to worry about in water itself.
Okay. And generally, what are the transit times between injection and production well? That's another question from Harish.
That depends on the field.
That's yeah, but that's natural fractures. What you mentioned earlier, the faults, uh, those are
But
highly
if you
risk.
can provide maybe people a sense of scale, just probably that's what's behind the question, right? Indeed,
Right.
field dependent, absolutely. But what scales are you talking about? For example, for
No,
this job, well,
it could be within the first 24 hours you start seeing it, and then it can last longer than that.
We've got offshore projects, waterflood projects, 15-year transit times. So these tracers don't break down. They're not radioactive, right? So they don't have a half-life. They're inert. They can maintain through pretty high temperatures. So as long as it's not as high as I mentioned before, um, we've had, yeah, between hours and 15 years, depends on the field and the study. So
okay. I do have one. So, so I have a comment and a question. I think generally, I find it really great that people are doing treatments after the primary treatment. The discussion of surfactants at the beginning of the unconventionals in 2010 was a big, big deal because the conventional thinking will tell you, well, if you're in a very tight formation, you're bumping all this water, although and you don't recover half of it at least, right? That probably half that remains there is blocking you, and et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, that was a very initial thinking, extrapolating conventional hydraulic fracking into the unconventionals, but then people start arguing that the pores, the organic matter is where the oil and the gas that gets produced, that's where it gets stored, and the organic matter is not so susceptible to water blockage and things like that, right? Big, big debate. I remember in Shell when we had to move from pure water for fracking, like no salinity to recycle it was a whole discussion and but the reality is that recycled water works and actually leaving water behind we have wells anecdotally that we had to leave shut in because we couldn't bring them in production for 4 or 5 months and then boom they come back really great, right? So it seems soaking the system kind of helps, etc. So in that primary treatment there is so much that we don't know, right? But then again, now the industry has this huge inventory of wells that are, slowly depleting themselves, and I think trying to get more of that is it's great, right? So I really like that. Like, well, maybe we didn't get wettability perfect from the beginning because there's so many things going on. People want put very little money, get a lot of production, but now that you have these aging fields, there may be the appetite to go after that. So I think that's one of the key things the one I wanted to bring this webinar is to start getting that notion of this brownfield optimization right now with the huge inventory that exists in the US and in Vaca Muerta is starting to exist, right? So yeah, so that's my first comment. I really like that aspect that we're talking about the brownfield element. And then second, to me, it was a bit of a surprise this whole discussion about soaking time. I mean, when I did matrix treatments in the past, I'll go to the lab, I put the chemical and kind of get an idea for how long will imbibe, how much residence time will it take to really just get into the rock, and then I'll apply a safety factor, and that'll be my soaking time, right? Um, why don't you think that's the case and the soak time is so debated when you can actually in the lab just get an idea roughly of how things imbibe
I
and
think
take how long does it take, right? Because I mean
so.
I don't imagine this surface tension process, the kinetics are so slow that you gotta wait days
Mm,
and weeks, right? So
I
to me
think
that's a bit something that I don't understand. I would like if you can elaborate.
I I mean permeability is a big issue, is a big part of it, right? I mean, how long does it take for the fluid to actually move into that rock?
Okay.
I for this reservoir, I don't have that information, right? If it's sandstone, it's pretty quick. It's just going to find its way into high porosity, high permeability. I think the soak time could be short, but we're not operating in those fields anymore with these frac wells, right? So if you think that surfactant is helping that water work its way into the rock, how long do you think that's going to take? I'm not a petrophysicist, so I won't
Okay.
even I wouldn't even go there as and state what I think will happen because I don't know. But these studies are great because if you have a field that's got very similar rock, very similar wells, and you've got 10, 20 wells, why not vary soak time if you have that financial backing to be able to run these studies and test it and use the tracers. But even without tracers, you've got water recovery. These aren't these aren't new wells. They've got water. There's water in that rock, so the tracers help differentiate, right? Water recoveries. I I couldn't tell you the difference between a 10-day soak time and just popping it and opening it right back up. And unless we
And
get a study in that shows that. But
Okay. So no, I think that that's a fair comment. People are just thinking permeability reverse is like how long will it take to
mhm.
to
well,
get
and
farther?
also
But I
you
think you're
can
probably being an exponential curve pretty easily. So
Yeah.
with this case study that we have in here. I mean, we don't know the production data, but we have the tracer, and we can calculate how long has the tracer been interacting with the formation, because throughout the 4 month, 5 months of almost 6 months of sampling, we saw the curve of the tracer. So we know that there is some interaction beyond the initial touch of the surfactant with the formation. And if you see an improvement in production with time, as the concentration of the tracer is coming down, you can infer, well, that doesn't affect the soaking time during production that is occurring and is improving oil. So either the production curve either slows down and flattens in the production, or does it precipitously drop. If it precipitously drop, then you need more soaking time. But if you don't, um, but if it maintains, perhaps the surfactant is still acting uh, even during production.
okay. There's a final question, and then I think we'll wrap it up from Carlos Claros. In your example, the percentage fluid recovery averaged 15%. Is this a typical recovery, or are there other formations that return more fluid to surface during production?
That's a good question. So it differentiate every field is different, every well is different. And it depends on the sample frequency, sample timing. Like how long are you taking samples? I think we sampled for 4 months and concentrations were still high, in my opinion, at the end of that sampling period. As Claudio mentioned, we can detect tracers down below 1 ppb. We're talking parts per trillion. After 4 months, if they'd continued sampling for another 6, 7 months to a year, we may still be seeing the tracer, and you might have gotten up to 50% fluid recovery. So it's dependent on how long we can sample and everything else. But I've seen variations from 20 to 30 to 40, but eventually they stop sampling. They think they got the data they want, the customer, and I can't convince them otherwise. I'd love to see it go out for a year or two until the tracer's undetectable, or to a point where that it's usually an exponential decline on this tracer recovery and the water recovery. So a point where it starts to fall linear, then we can stop and say, all right, you've recovered about 50%, 30%, 100%. But yeah, it depends on how long we can sample and how much data we have. I think that would have gone probably 30 to 40% recovery.
Okay. Well, 2 minutes to finalize the hour. I'd like to give recognize Claudia and Richard for their time and thank you for your great presentation and all your insights. I'd like to recognize our sponsors, platinum sponsors, Pan American Energy and Chevron. Our gold sponsors, Tenaris, SLB, Pickering Energy Partners, Fugro and Neighbors, and our silver sponsors, YPF, Spark, um, Nicholson and Cano, Equinor, Halliburton, United Airlines, Enerflex, and Von Gotten Engineering. So thank you very much. I encourage you, those that are still around, to visit our website, eapgh Houston.org. We have the Vaca Muerta Day, which is a bi-yearly event. We'll have CEOs from various companies from Vaca Muerta. We'll have the president of YPF, the governors of the provinces of Neuquén and Rio Negro, plus other members. So very, very rich discussion about Vaca Muerta. So I really encourage you to look at our website and register for that. It is September 3rd here in Houston. So any closing messages, Claudia or Richard, before we adjourn?
Well, I mean, just wanted to thank the audience today for the time and appreciate the questions and give us a. I hope this was a useful and insightful presentation to all of you. And you know, Richard, do you have?
No, you said it all. Thank you very much for attending, and thank you for giving us the time to talk, Ernesto. Appreciate it. And AIPG, thank you.
All right.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.